When I first decided to file for divorce, I thought I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but for my kids. For years, our marriage had been unraveling, the love we once shared buried under layers of resentment, arguments, and cold silences. I told myself that leaving was the best choice, that giving our children a peaceful home, however fractured, was better than forcing them to grow up in a war zone. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would spiral out of control. It started with the papers. I served them to Adam on a quiet Thursday morning. I'd waited until the kids, Mia and Ethan, were at school, hoping to avoid a scene. Adam stared at the documents, his face unreadable. "You're really doing this?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," I said, my stomach churning. He nodded slowly, setting the papers down on the counter. "I see." For a moment, I thought he might fight me, beg me to reconsider. But instead, he said, "If this is what you want, fine. But don't think for a second I'm letting you take the kids." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Adam, we can work out a custody arrangement," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He shook his head, his eyes cold. "No, they're staying with me." At first, I didn't take him seriously. Adam was a good father, but he'd always been more focused on work than parenting. He traveled constantly for his job, often leaving me to handle everything at home. Surely, I thought, he wouldn't try to take full custody. But then the court papers arrived. Adam was filing for sole custody, claiming I was an unfit mother. I couldn't believe it. Unfit? I'd spent years being the primary caregiver, packing lunches, helping with homework, staying up all night when Mia had a fever. I wasn't perfect, but I loved my kids more than anything in the world. How could Adam even think I wasn't capable of taking care of them? The court battle began in earnest, and it was uglier than I ever could have imagined. Adam's lawyers painted a picture of me as unstable and irresponsible. They brought up every mistake I'd ever made, twisting the truth until it barely resembled my life. "She's emotionally volatile," Adam said during one hearing. "The kids need stability, and I'm the only one who can provide that." I sat there, stunned, as the judge nodded along, his expression unreadable. My lawyer, Kelly, did her best to defend me, pointing out that I'd been the primary caregiver for years, that Adam's work schedule made it difficult for him to be present. But Adam's legal team was relentless. They produced emails and texts from years ago, moments of frustration I'd shared with friends about feeling overwhelmed as a mother. "I never said I couldn't handle it," I told the judge, my voice shaking. I was venting. Everyone needs to vent sometimes. But the damage was done. The hardest part was seeing how it affected Mia and Ethan. They didn't understand what was happening, why Mommy and Daddy were fighting so much. "Do you still love us?" Ethan asked one night, his small voice breaking my heart. "Of course I do," I said, pulling him into my arms. "I love you both more than anything." "Then why are you and Daddy so mad at each other?" Mia asked, her big brown eyes filled with confusion. I didn't know how to answer. The turning point came during a home evaluation. A court-appointed evaluator visited both Adam's house and mine, interviewing the kids and observing our interactions. I thought I'd done well, that I'd shown the evaluator just how much I loved and cared for my children. But when the report came back, it was clear that Adam's legal team had spun the narrative in their favor. "While both parents are capable, Mr. Wilson's home provides greater stability," the evaluator wrote. Stability. That word haunted me. The day of the final hearing, I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge read his decision. "Sole custody will be awarded to Mr. Wilson," he said, his voice steady. "Ms. Wilson will have visitation rights, with a schedule to be determined." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Adam looked over at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. That evening, as I packed up the kids' belongings for their move to Adam's house, I felt like a failure. "Why can't we stay with you?" Mia asked, tears streaming down her face. "I'm still your mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I'm going to see you all the time. I promise." But as I watched them drive away with Adam, I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. The first morning without Mia and Ethan was the hardest. I woke up at 7 a.m., my body automatically moving to get them ready for school. But then I remembered, they weren't here. The silence in the house was deafening. No laughter, no footsteps, no sounds of cereal being poured into bowls. Just me, alone with my thoughts. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chairs where they used to sit, and felt the weight of their absence settle over me like a heavy blanket. At first, I tried to keep myself busy. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and volunteering for extra projects. I joined a yoga class, started cooking elaborate meals, and even signed up for a local book club. But no matter how much I filled my schedule, the emptiness lingered. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of them: the playground where we used to spend Saturday afternoons, the ice cream shop where we'd go after school, the little boutique where I'd buy Mia's hair bows and Ethan's favorite pajamas. It felt like I was living in a world they'd left behind. The visitation schedule didn't make things easier. I got to see them every other weekend and one evening during the week, but it wasn't enough. When they came over, they seemed happy to be with me, but there was always a moment when they'd say something that shattered me. "Daddy's house has a pool," Ethan said one day, his face lighting up with excitement. "And he lets us have pizza for dinner twice a week," Mia added, grinning. I forced myself to smile, hiding the pang of jealousy that twisted in my chest. "That sounds fun," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, I couldn't help feeling like I was losing them. Adam wasn't cruel, but he was distant. When he dropped the kids off, he'd barely look at me, offering only curt replies to my questions about their schedules or school activities. I wanted to hate him for what he'd done, for taking them away from me. But deep down, I knew that hate wouldn't change anything. One evening, after a particularly emotional goodbye with the kids, I called my best friend, Emily. "I feel like I'm failing them," I said, my voice trembling. "You're not failing, Sarah," she said firmly. "You're doing the best you can. And the kids know how much you love them." "Do they?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Because sometimes it feels like they're slipping away." "They're not," Emily said. "They're just adjusting. Give it time." Her words were meant to comfort me, but they didn't erase the ache in my chest. One day, I received an email from Mia's teacher about a parent-teacher conference. I immediately replied, asking for a time that worked for me. But the next day, I got a message saying Adam had already scheduled it during a time I couldn't attend. I called Adam, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Why didn't you check with me about the conference?" "I didn't think it mattered," he said flatly. "I'm handling it." "But I want to be involved too," I said, frustration bubbling up. "Sarah, you have your visitation time. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said before hanging up. His words stung, and for the first time, I realized how powerless I was. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I felt too scared to say out loud. I wrote about the guilt, the anger, the overwhelming sadness. But I also wrote about the small moments of joy, the way Mia hugged me so tightly when she arrived, the way Ethan asked me to read him his favorite bedtime story, even though he'd already heard it 100 times. Those moments became my lifeline, reminders that I was still their mother, no matter what the court had decided. One evening, during dinner with the kids, Mia asked, "Mom, are you okay?" Her question caught me off guard. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "You just seem sad sometimes," she said, her voice soft. I felt a lump form in my throat. "I miss you and Ethan when you're not here," I admitted. "But I'm so happy when I get to see you." Mia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "We miss you too." Her words felt like a balm on a wound I didn't realize I'd been hiding. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he said, "Mom, do you think we'll ever live together again?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I don't know, buddy," I said softly. "But no matter where you live, I'll always be your mom, and I'll always love you." "Promise?" he asked, his small hand reaching for mine. "Promise," I said, my voice trembling. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Ethan's question. I didn't have the answers, and I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain: I would keep fighting for my kids, no matter how hard it got. Because being their mom was the one thing I couldn't give up. After that night, something shifted inside me. Ethan's question, "Do you think we'll ever live together again?" replayed in my mind constantly. I realized that while I couldn't undo the court's decision, I could fight to be the best mom I could be with the time I had. I wasn't going to let my limited custody define my relationship with my children. I started making the most of every visit. On weeknight visits, I'd help them with homework, cook their favorite meals, and make sure our evenings were full of laughter and connection. Weekends became adventures, trips to the zoo, picnics in the park, and movie nights complete with popcorn and cozy blankets. The joy on their faces during these moments reminded me of why I was fighting so hard to stay present in their lives. But no matter how much I tried, the sense of loss was always there. It wasn't just about the time I missed with them, it was the milestones I couldn't be part of. When Mia won a school art contest, I found out through a text from Ethan. "Mia got a ribbon. Daddy says we can put it on the fridge." I smiled at his excitement, but felt a pang of sadness that I hadn't been there to cheer her on. When Ethan scored his first goal in soccer, Adam sent me a photo of him grinning, holding up his arms in victory. I stared at the picture for a long time, feeling both pride and heartache. One evening, during a particularly emotional session with my therapist, I confessed my fears. "I feel like I'm losing them," I said, my voice trembling. "Like, every day they're becoming more attached to Adam's house, Adam's life, Adam's world." My therapist, a kind woman named Clara, nodded thoughtfully. "It's natural to feel that way," she said. "But remember, your relationship with your kids isn't defined by how much time you spend with them. It's about the quality of that time." Her words stuck with me, and I began to focus on making every moment count. At the same time, I started working with Kelly, my lawyer, on a plan to revisit the custody agreement. "I don't want to take them away from Adam," I said during one meeting. "I just want to be more present in their lives. I want more time with them." Kelly nodded. "We'll need to show the court that circumstances have changed," she said. "That you've built a stable environment for them, and that increased custody would be in their best interests." It wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to do whatever it took. Over the next few months, I focused on building that stability. I took on a more flexible job that allowed me to be available for the kids' events. I moved into a house closer to their school and decorated it with their favorite colors, filling it with books, toys, and pictures of us together. Every step felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was capable of creating a home where my children could thrive. One evening, as I sat with Mia and Ethan working on a school project, Mia looked up at me and said, "Mom, I like it here." Her words were simple, but they meant everything. "Me too," I said, smiling. The court date to revisit custody was set for 6 months later, and during that time, I documented everything, attending parent-teacher conferences, coaching Ethan's soccer team on weekends, and being present for every milestone I could. Adam, to his credit, didn't interfere. While he wasn't enthusiastic about the idea of changing the custody arrangement, he didn't try to sabotage my efforts either. The day of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding as Kelly presented our case. She showed the judge photos of the house, records of my involvement in the kids' lives, and letters from Mia and Ethan's teachers praising my efforts. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and said, "I love my children more than anything. I want to be there for them, to support them, and to create a life where they know they're loved and valued. I'm not asking to take them away from their father. I'm asking for the chance to be the mom they deserve." The judge's decision came a week later. While I didn't get full custody, I was granted significantly more time with Mia and Ethan. Instead of one weeknight and alternate weekends, I now had them every other week, splitting custody evenly with Adam. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was more than I dared to dream. That first week with them in my house felt like a gift. We cooked meals together, played board games, and stayed up late talking about their dreams and fears. One evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, I'm glad we get to be here more." "Me too, buddy," I said, tears filling my eyes. As I sat on the couch that night, looking around at the home we'd created together, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The fight for custody had been painful, but it had also reminded me of just how much I was willing to do for my children. And as I thought about the road ahead, I felt a sense of hope. Our family might look different now, but it was still ours. And that was enough. The new custody arrangement marked the start of a new chapter for me, Mia, and Ethan. Having them for a full week at a time felt like a dream. I no longer had to cram everything into short visits or feel like I was missing out on their lives. Instead, we had time to simply be, to enjoy the everyday moments I'd missed so much. The first full week they stayed with me, we made it special. I let them pick out new decorations for their rooms, turning the space into a reflection of who they were. Mia chose fairy lights and posters of her favorite bands, while Ethan filled his shelves with action figures and books about space. "Now it really feels like home," Mia said, smiling as she arranged her pillows. Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. But rebuilding our lives wasn't without its challenges. Adjusting to the new schedule took time, and there were moments when the kids struggled with the transition. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Ethan looked up from his plate and said, "I miss Daddy." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to smile. "It's okay to miss him," I said gently. "He misses you too." "Do you miss him?" Mia asked, her eyes searching mine. The question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. "Sometimes," I said. "But even though we're not together anymore, we both love you very much. And that will never change." Balancing co-parenting with Adam was another hurdle. We kept our communication civil, sticking to texts and emails to coordinate schedules and share updates about the kids. One evening, after Ethan scored another goal in soccer, I texted Adam a video of the moment. "Great shot," he replied. "He's really improving." It wasn't much, but it was a step toward a more cooperative relationship, something I knew was important for Mia and Ethan. Over time, I began to notice how much stronger our bond was becoming. The kids started opening up to me more, sharing their thoughts and feelings in ways they hadn't before. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Mia said, "I like how it feels here now. It's not sad anymore." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "That's because of you and Ethan," I said. "You bring so much light into this house." Mia smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. As we settled into our new normal, I also started focusing on myself again. I picked up old hobbies like gardening and painting and reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the custody battle. One weekend, while the kids were with Adam, I joined a hiking group and discovered a love for the outdoors. Those moments of self-discovery reminded me that I wasn't just a mom, I was a whole person with dreams and passions of my own. One afternoon, as I worked on a painting in the living room, Ethan came over and watched me quietly. "Can I try?" he asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Of course," I said, handing him a brush. We spent the next hour painting together, laughing as we mixed colors and tried to create something recognizable. When we finished, Ethan held up his canvas proudly. "It's not as good as yours, but I like it." "It's perfect," I said, smiling. Those small moments of connection became the foundation of our new life. We weren't just a family navigating a custody arrangement. We were a family rediscovering what it meant to be together. At the same time, I began to reflect on how far I'd come. The guilt and sadness that had once consumed me started to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. I knew I'd made mistakes, but I also knew I'd done everything I could to rebuild my relationship with my children. And that, I realized, was enough. One evening, as I tucked Mia and Ethan into bed, Mia looked up at me and said, "Mom, I'm glad we get to stay here more now." "Me too," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Ethan chimed in, "Yeah, it's like we have two homes now." His words brought a smile to my face. "That's exactly what you have," I said. "Two homes, and two parents who love you very much." As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how much our lives had changed. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were moving forward together. Our family wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that was all that mattered. With the new custody arrangement firmly in place, life began to settle into a rhythm. Every other week, the house was alive with the sound of laughter, arguments over board games, and the occasional chaos of spilled milk or forgotten homework. And during the weeks the kids were with Adam, I focused on rebuilding myself, a balance I hadn't realized I needed. At first, I didn't know what to do with the quiet. The house felt too still, too empty without Mia and Ethan. I'd find myself wandering into their rooms, straightening the covers on their beds, or picking up stray socks they'd left behind. But gradually, I learned to appreciate the quiet. I started journaling again, filling pages with thoughts and feelings I'd ignored for years. I signed up for a photography class and spent weekends exploring local parks, capturing moments of beauty I'd never noticed before. Those quiet weeks became a time for reflection, a chance to rediscover who I was outside of being a mom. One weekend, as I hiked a trail near the edge of town, I met a woman named Claire. She was snapping photos of the same wildflowers I'd been admiring, and we struck up a conversation. "You hike here often?" she asked, adjusting her camera. "Not really," I admitted. "I'm just starting to explore more." "Well, you've got a good eye," she said, nodding toward my camera. Her words sparked a conversation that lasted the entire hike, and by the end, she'd invited me to join her photography group. Joining the group was one of the best decisions I'd made in years. It gave me something to look forward to during the weeks without the kids and introduced me to a community of people who shared my interests. Through photography, I began to see the world and myself in a new light. One evening, as I sorted through the photos I'd taken that day, I found a picture of Mia and Ethan from a recent outing. They were sitting on a park bench, their faces lit up with laughter as they shared an ice cream cone. I stared at the photo for a long time, my heart swelling with a mix of pride and love. For so long, I'd been consumed by guilt and fear, convinced that I'd failed them. But looking at that picture, I realized something important. I hadn't failed. I was still here, still showing up, still loving them with everything I had. The next time the kids came to stay, I showed them the photo. "Look at us," Ethan said, grinning. "We look so happy." "That's because you are," I said, smiling. Mia leaned over to get a closer look. "Can we hang it up in the living room?" "Of course," I said, my heart swelling. We spent the next hour picking out a frame and finding the perfect spot on the wall. Every time I walked past it, I felt a little more whole. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice how much the kids had grown, not just physically, but emotionally. Mia became more confident, her natural curiosity shining through in her school projects and conversations. Ethan, always full of energy, started showing a quieter, more reflective side, often asking me thoughtful questions about the world around him. "Mom, do you think we're lucky?" he asked one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Why do you ask?" I said, curious. "Because we have 2 houses and 2 parents who love us," he said simply. His words brought tears to my eyes. "Yes, Ethan," I said, pulling him into a hug. "I think we're very lucky." Adam and I continued to navigate co-parenting, finding a tentative rhythm that worked for all of us. While we weren't close, there was a mutual respect that hadn't been there before, a shared understanding that we both wanted what was best for the kids. One day, as he dropped them off, he handed me a folder of school projects they'd been working on. "Ethan's really into space lately," he said, smiling. "He made a whole model of the solar system." "Thanks for sharing this," I said, genuinely touched. "We're doing our best," he said, his tone softer than I'd expected. Those small moments of cooperation reminded me that, even though we were no longer a couple, we were still a team. And as we worked together to support Mia and Ethan, I felt a sense of hope, not just for them, but for all of us. One weekend, as the kids and I explored a new hiking trail, Mia turned to me and said, "Mom, do you think things will always be like this?" "Like what?" I asked. "Happy," she said, her eyes bright. I paused, thinking about her question. "I think happiness comes and goes," I said honestly. "But as long as we have each other, I think we'll be okay." Mia nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think so too." That night, as I tucked them into bed, I felt a deep sense of peace. Our family wasn't perfect, and our lives weren't without challenges. But we were finding our way, one step at a time. And in those quiet moments, I realized that balance wasn't about having everything figured out, it was about finding joy in the journey. As the seasons changed, so did we. Mia and Ethan seemed to thrive in our new routine. They had their favorite spots in both homes, their favorite traditions with each parent, and their own unique ways of making each place feel like theirs. One evening, as we painted together in the living room, Mia said, "It's like we're a team now, me, Ethan, you, and Daddy." Her words caught me off guard, but filled me with a sense of pride. "That's exactly what we are," I said, smiling. Being a team didn't mean everything was perfect. There were still moments of frustration, missed messages, forgotten schedules, and the occasional disagreement with Adam. But over time, we learned how to navigate those challenges with grace. One afternoon, after a mix-up about Ethan's soccer practice, I called Adam to sort things out. "Sorry about that," he said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." "It's okay," I said, surprised by how easy the words came. We're all juggling a lot. For the first time in years, it felt like we were truly on the same page. As co-parenting became smoother, I began to focus more on my own growth. The photography group turned into a passion project, and I started submitting my work to local contests and exhibitions. One of my photos, a candid shot of Mia and Ethan laughing by a river, won first place in a small competition. The recognition felt amazing, but what mattered more was the pride I saw in my kids' eyes when I told them. "Mom, you're really good at this," Ethan said, beaming. "Thanks, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Maybe I'll teach you how to use the camera one day." "Can I try to?" Mia asked eagerly. "Of course," I said, smiling. We started having photography days as a family, exploring parks and trails with cameras in hand. Mia loved capturing close-ups of flowers and insects, while Ethan focused on big, dramatic landscapes. Watching them discover their own creativity was one of the greatest joys I'd ever experienced. At the same time, I began reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. One evening, during a dinner party hosted by Claire, I found myself laughing harder than I had in years. "You seem so much lighter," Claire said as we cleaned up afterward. "Lighter?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Like you're not carrying the weight of the world anymore," she said. Her words stayed with me, and I realized she was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. That freedom extended to my relationship with Adam. One evening, as we sat together at Mia's school play, we shared a rare moment of nostalgia. "Remember when we used to talk about how she'd be a star one day?" he said, smiling as Mia delivered her lines. "I do," I said softly. We sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of shared memories settling between us. "I think we did okay," he said quietly. "I think so too," I said, my voice steady. As the months passed, I noticed how much stronger our family had become, not in the traditional sense, but in a way that worked for us. Mia and Ethan were happier, more confident, and more open about their feelings. One night, as we sat around the dinner table, Ethan said, "You know what I like about having two houses?" "What's that?" I asked, curious. "We get twice the fun," he said, grinning. His words made us all laugh, and in that moment, I realized how far we'd come. At the same time, I found myself reflecting on how much I'd grown. I'd started this journey feeling lost, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. But now, I felt grounded, capable, and proud of the life I was building, not just for my kids, but for myself. One weekend, as the kids and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mia turned to me and said, "Mom, are you happy?" Her question caught me off guard, but I answered honestly. "I am," I said, smiling. "And you know what? I think you and Ethan have a lot to do with that." Mia grinned, leaning her head on my shoulder. "We're happy too," she said softly. That night, as I tucked them into bed, I thought about how much our lives had changed. We weren't the family we used to be, but we were stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. And in those quiet moments, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything we'd overcome. As the years went by, our lives settled into a rhythm that felt natural, even joyful. Mia and Ethan grew into remarkable young people, kind, curious, and full of life. Watching them navigate the world, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in who they were becoming, but in the family we had built together. It wasn't the family I'd envisioned when I first became a mom, but it was ours. One afternoon, as we sorted through old photo albums for a school project, Ethan held up a picture of the four of us from years ago, me, Adam, Mia, and him, smiling at the beach. "Do you miss it?" he asked, his voice soft. I took a moment before answering. "I miss the good times," I said honestly. "But I think we've made something just as good now. Don't you?" Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I like how things are now." His words reassured me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. The shared custody arrangement became second nature over time, and the tension between Adam and me faded into something resembling friendship. We didn't always agree. There were still moments of miscommunication and differing opinions, but we approached those challenges with mutual respect. One evening, after Ethan's soccer game, Adam pulled me aside. "Thanks for helping him practice," he said, his tone warm. "He's really improved." "Of course," I said, smiling. "We're a team, remember?" He nodded, and for the first time, it felt like we truly were. As the kids grew older, I found myself embracing new opportunities. My photography turned into a side business, with families and couples hiring me to capture their special moments. One evening, after finishing a shoot at the park, I sat by the river and watched the sunset, my camera resting in my lap. I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment, the struggles, the heartbreak, the resilience it had taken to rebuild my life. And for the first time, I felt at peace with all of it. The kids continued to flourish, each finding their own passions. Mia joined the school's drama club, her natural confidence shining on stage. Ethan, ever curious, threw himself into science fairs and robotics competitions. "Mom, can I show you my project?" he asked one evening, holding up a half-finished robot. "Of course," I said, sitting down beside him. As he explained each part of the design, his enthusiasm was infectious. "You're amazing, Ethan," I said, ruffling his hair. He grinned. "I get it from you." Mia's performances became a family event, with both Adam and me sitting in the audience, cheering her on. After one particularly stunning performance, she ran up to us, her face glowing with pride. "Did you see me?" she asked breathlessly. "You were incredible," I said, pulling her into a hug. Adam nodded, smiling. "Absolutely amazing." For a moment we stood there together, a reminder that, no matter how much had changed, we were still a family. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Mia said, "Mom, do you think things turned out the way they were supposed to?" Her question made me pause. "I think things turned out the way they needed to," I said carefully. "And even though it's not what I imagined, I'm really happy with where we are now." Mia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Me too," she said. As I tucked Ethan into bed later that night, he looked up at me and said, "Mom, do you think we're lucky?" "Why do you ask?" I said, smiling. "Because we have 2 houses and 2 parents who love us," he said simply. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Yes, Ethan," I said, brushing his hair back. "I think we're very lucky." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much our lives had changed. We weren't the same family we used to be, but we'd grown into something just as beautiful. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for my kids, for the journey we'd shared, and for the future we were still building together. Years later, as I watched Mia graduate from high school, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Ethan stood beside me, his camera in hand, capturing every moment. "We did it, Mom," he said, smiling up at me. "No," I said, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "You did it. Both of you." As Mia tossed her cap into the air, I felt a wave of emotions, joy, pride, and a quiet confidence that, no matter what the future held, we would face it together. Our family wasn't traditional, but it was strong. It was loving. And it was enough.